Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching the stars through the main screen, when everything changed forever. The exploration ship had been mapping new trade routes between Earth and the outer colonies when the sensors started going crazy. First one contact appeared on the screen, then 10, then 100. Jake rubbed his eyes, thinking the equipment was broken, but the contacts kept coming. Lieutenant Ben Clark ran to his station with sweat on his face. The young officer had never seen anything like this in his 3 years of service. He checked the readings twice before speaking. The ships appearing around them were massive beyond anything humans had ever built. Each one was the size of a small city floating in space like metal mountains. Jake ordered all stop and tried to contact the unknown vessels. The response came immediately, but not in any language anyone on the Liberty had ever heard. The alien. Words sounded harsh and commanding, like someone giving orders to servants. Then the translation software kicked in, and Jake felt his blood turn cold. Admiral Lisa Carter received the emergency transmission from the Liberty while sitting in her office on Earth. She had been reviewing patrol schedules when Jake's face appeared on her screen, looking pale and shaken. The message he delivered made her forget everything else she was supposed to do that day. Unknown alien ships had appeared simultaneously above every human world in the galaxy. The aliens called themselves the Valdari Empire, and they had a message for humanity. Supreme Commander Zethkar spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. His words were translated into every human language and broadcast to every colony at the same time. He told humanity they were now property of the Valdari Empire, just like 847 other species across the galaxy. President Daniel Brooks listened to the alien ultimatum from his office in Washington. The Valdari Supreme Commander explained how this process worked. Every species in the galaxy had been given the same choice. They could surrender all weapons, disband their military, and accept permanent slavery. In return, they would be allowed to live and serve their new masters. The alternative was complete destruction. Zethkar made it clear this was not a negotiation. Every species that had tried to fight had been wiped out completely. The smart ones accepted their new role as servants and were allowed to continue existing. Humanity had 72 hours to make their choice. After that time period, the Valdari would assume they had chosen death and would act accordingly. Dr. Maya Patel watched the broadcast from her laboratory on Mars colony. She had been working on new shield technology when the transmission interrupted. Every screen in the facility, the alien Supreme Commander looked like a giant insect with metal plates covering his body. His 4 arms moved as he spoke, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. Jake Morrison tried to process what he was hearing. The Liberty was surrounded by alien ships, but none of them had fired yet. The Valdari seemed confident that humans would make the same choice as every other species they had encountered. They appeared to be waiting patiently for humanity to accept the obvious reality of their situation. Admiral Carter called an emergency meeting of all fleet commanders. Military leaders from every human colony gathered in virtual conference to discuss their response. Some argued for immediate surrender, pointing out that humanity had no chance against such overwhelming force. Others wanted to fight regardless of the odds. The debate grew heated as the deadline approached. Commander Alex Taylor defended Mars colony and knew his small garrison could not stop even one of the alien ships. The Valdari vessels in orbit around the Red Planet outnumbered his entire defense. Forced by 10 to 1, each alien ship carried enough firepower to level entire cities. Fighting seemed like suicide, but the alternative was slavery for every human being alive. President Brooks consulted with world leaders and colony governors about humanity's response. The discussion lasted for hours with people arguing from every possible angle. Some pointed out that other advanced civilizations had already tried fighting and failed. Others insisted that humans were different somehow and might succeed where others had not. The deadline approached faster than anyone wanted. Zethkar had made it clear that delay would be treated the same as refusal. Humanity needed to make a choice and communicate it to the waiting fleet. Every human world held its breath as President Brooks prepared to announce their decision to the galaxy. When the moment came, President Brooks spoke in a calm, clear voice that was broadcast to every Valdari ship simultaneously. His message was simple and direct with no room for misunderstanding. Looking directly into the camera, he said the word that would change everything. No. The Valdari had conquered 847 different species across the galaxy. Every single one had eventually chosen survival over resistance. Some had fought briefly before accepting reality, but all had ultimately surrendered. None had ever simply refused to negotiate or consider the terms being offered. Zethkar stared at the transmission in confusion. His tactical advisors checked the translation software, thinking there must have been an error. The human leader had not asked for better terms or more time to consider. He had not tried to bargain or find some middle ground. He had simply said, no, as if the concept of slavery was so absurd it did not deserve serious consideration. The Supreme Commander called for immediate consultation with his fleet leaders. In all their years of conquest, they had never encountered this response. Species typically begged for mercy or tried to negotiate better treatment for their people. Some attempted hopeless final battles, but always with the understanding that surrender remained an option. Humans seemed to have rejected the entire premise of the situation. Zethkar decided to make an example that would bring humans to their senses. The Supreme Commander selected the mining station at Kepler 442 because it was isolated and defended by only a small security force. He wanted to show humanity what happened to those who refused the generous offer of slavery. The attack would demonstrate Valdari power and convince humans to reconsider their foolish decision. The mining station housed 3,000 workers who extracted rare metals from the asteroid belt. Station Commander Rick Santos received the evacuation order, but there was nowhere to run. The nearest human ship was 2 days away, and the Valdari fleet would not wait. Santos ordered all civilians to the emergency shelters and prepared his 12 security officers for a battle they could not win. Captain Steve Rodriguez commanded the cargo hauler Defiance, which was loading ore when the alien ships appeared. His vessel was not designed for combat, but Rodriguez refused to abandon the mining station. He positioned his ship between the civilians and the approaching Valdari destroyers. The Defiance had no weapons beyond mining lasers, but Rodriguez prepared to fight anyway. The Valdari bombardment lasted exactly 10 minutes. Their plasma cannons turned the mining station into glowing debris while their energy beams sliced through the Defiance like paper. Steve Rodriguez transmitted his final message as his ship broke apart around him. He told humanity that aliens bled just like humans when you hit them hard enough. His words would become a rallying cry for the resistance. Admiral Carter watched the destruction from Earth and felt her heart break for the 3,000 people who had just died. The Valdari had made their point with brutal efficiency. Any reasonable species would now understand the consequences of resistance and choose survival over meaningless defiance. But Carter was already planning humanity's response, and it did not involve surrender. President Brooks addressed the human colonies after the attack on Kepler 442. He spoke about the miners who had died and the cargo captain who had fought hopeless odds to protect civilians. Brooks explained that the Valdari expected this demonstration to break human spirit and force them to accept slavery. Instead, it had shown humanity exactly what kind of masters the aliens would be. Commander Alex Taylor received orders to begin immediate fortification of Mars colony. The Red Planet's cave systems provided natural shelter from orbital bombardment, while its low gravity would help human defenders move quickly. Taylor had studied guerrilla warfare throughout Earth's history and knew that motivated defenders with knowledge of local terrain could defeat larger forces. Dr. Maya Patel worked frantically to analyze wreckage from the destroyed mining station. Pieces of Valdari technology had been scattered across the asteroid field where human salvage teams could recover them. Patel hoped to find weaknesses in alien shields or weapons systems that could give humanity some advantage in the coming war. The Valdari fleet moved to attack major human colonies, expecting quick surrender after their demonstration of power. Zethkar was confident that rational beings would choose life over death once they understood the situation clearly. The mining station had been destroyed to save human lives by convincing them not to fight a war they could not win. Mars Colony became the first target for full invasion when Commander Taylor refused to surrender his forces. Valdari troopships descended through the thin atmosphere while their warships bombarded human defensive positions. Taylor had moved most civilians into deep caves while his soldiers prepared to make the aliens pay for every meter of ground. The first Valdari soldiers to land on Mars discovered that humans did not fight like other species they had conquered. Instead of meeting them in open battle, the defenders used hit-and-run tactics. Human soldiers would attack from hidden positions, then disappear into tunnel systems the aliens could not follow. Each assault cost the Valdari troops, while humans seemed to vanish like ghosts. Jake Morrison brought the Liberty back to Earth carrying vital intelligence about Valdari ship capabilities. His crew had observed the alien fleet during the mining station attack and noticed several important details. The enemy ships were powerful, but they seemed to follow rigid tactical patterns. Their commanders appeared unwilling to deviate from standard procedures even when facing unexpected situations. Lieutenant Ben Clark had been monitoring Valdari communications during the attack and discovered something interesting. The alien language contained no words for concepts like freedom or independence. Their society seemed built entirely around hierarchy and obedience. The idea that humans might fight for principles rather than survival appeared to genuinely confuse them. Dr. Patel made her first breakthrough while examining fragments of Valdari armor recovered from Mars. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but it relied on quantum frequencies that human equipment could potentially disrupt. She began working on devices that might interfere with enemy shields or communication systems. Commander Taylor reported that Valdari ground forces were having difficulty adapting to guerrilla warfare. The aliens had overwhelming firepower, but they seemed unable to locate human defenders in the cave systems. Their thermal sensors could not penetrate the rocky terrain, and their troops moved slowly in the low-gravity environment. Admiral Carter coordinated resistance efforts across all human colonies while the Valdari continued their invasion. Each world faced similar attacks, but human defenders were learning from each battle. Information about alien tactics and weaknesses spread quickly through hidden communication networks that the enemy had not detected. The war that Zethkar expected to last days stretched into weeks as human resistance continued. Every colony that was supposed to surrender immediately instead fought back with increasing effectiveness. The Valdari found themselves bogged down in prolonged battles against an enemy that refused to follow the normal rules of conquest. Captain Rodriguez's sacrifice at Kepler 442 had inspired human defenders throughout the galaxy. His final transmission was repeated by resistance fighters as they attacked Valdari supply lines and communication centers. The phrase about aliens bleeding became a symbol of human defiance that spread from world to world. President Brooks established a shadow government that could continue operating even if Earth fell to invasion. Human leaders went underground both literally and figuratively as they prepared for a long war against impossible odds. The Valdari had conquered hundreds of species, but they had never faced an enemy that simply refused to acknowledge defeat. Zethkar began receiving reports from his field commanders that disturbed his confidence. Human resistance was not breaking, down as expected, and Valdari casualties were mounting steadily. The Supreme Commander had assured his superiors this would be a routine conquest, but the situation was becoming complicated in ways no one had anticipated. The mining station attack had been meant to terrorize humanity into submission, but instead, it had unified human colonies in their determination to fight. Every human world began mobilizing for war as civilians joined military units and scientists worked to develop new weapons. The Valdari had awakened something in humanity that they did not understand and could not easily defeat. 6 months after the first Valdari ships appeared, humanity had adapted to living under occupation. The aliens controlled space around every human world and had established bases in major cities, but they did not truly rule anything. Human resistance. Networks operated from hidden bunkers and cave systems that the invaders could not find or destroy. Colonel Amy Walsh commanded the Earth resistance from deep tunnels beneath the Rocky Mountains. Her network included former military officers, civilian volunteers, and scientists who had gone underground when the Valdari arrived. The mountain fortress contained workshops where humans built improvised weapons and communication centers that coordinated attacks across the planet. Lieutenant. Commander Rick Santos had survived the destruction of the mining station and now led sabotage operations against Valdari supply lines. His team specialized in attacking the convoys that brought equipment and reinforcements to alien bases. Santos had learned that Valdari logistics systems were efficient but inflexible and could be disrupted by persistent harassment. Dr. Maya Patel worked around the clock in her hidden laboratory, analyzing captured alien technology. She had made several important discoveries about Valdari equipment that gave human fighters new advantages. Most significantly, she had found that human neural patterns were completely incompatible with alien mind control devices that had been used to dominate other conquered species. The discovery about mind control explained why humans continued to resist when other species had eventually given up. The Valdari relied heavily on psychic manipulation to break the will of their enemies. But these techniques simply did not work on human brains. Where other conquered peoples had been mentally dominated into submission, humans remained free to think and plan and fight. Sergeant Tony Miller's squad became the first human unit to successfully jam Valdari energy shields during a raid on occupied Denver. Using Dr. Patel's quantum disruptor devices, they were able to penetrate alien defenses and destroy a communications center. The successful attack proved that Valdari technology was not invincible and could be defeated with the right tools and tactics. Commander Alex Taylor continued to hold Mars Colony against increasingly desperate Valdari assaults. The Red Planet had become a symbol of human resistance, as Taylor's forces used the cave systems to launch surprise attacks against alien positions. The Valdari had committed significant resources to capturing Mars, but human defenders remained hidden in tunnels they could not reach. Jake Morrison now commanded a small fleet of human ships that operated from hidden bases in asteroid fields. His vessels could not match Valdari firepower in direct combat, but they used hit-and-run tactics to attack isolated enemy ships. Morrison had developed new techniques for using civilian craft as weapons platforms that confused alien tactical computers. The resistance networks shared information through quantum communicators that Dr. Patel had modified to avoid Valdari detection. Every successful attack was analyzed, and the lessons learned were transmitted to other human cells. What worked on Earth was tried on Mars, and what succeeded on Mars was attempted in the outer colonies. Ben Clark had become an expert at intercepting Valdari communications and learned disturbing information about the alien empire. Many of the soldiers occupying human worlds were themselves enslaved beings from species the Valdari had conquered centuries ago. The empire was built on layers of subjugated peoples, each forced to help conquer new worlds for their masters. Amy. Walsh planned increasingly bold operations as the resistance grew stronger. Human cells attacked Valdari bases in coordinated strikes that forced the aliens to spread their forces thin. Each successful operation freed prisoners and captured equipment, while demonstrating that no alien position was truly safe from human attack. The Valdari had expected to complete their conquest of humanity within weeks, but found themselves fighting a war that had no clear end. Human resistance continued to grow stronger as more civilians joined the underground movement. The aliens controlled major population centers, but the countryside belonged to human fighters who struck without warning, then vanished. Dr. Patel reverse-engineered Valdari plasma weapons and began producing human versions that could penetrate alien armor. Her workshops hidden in caves and abandoned buildings turned out improvised weapons that resistance fighters used with devastating effect. The technological gap between humans and aliens was slowly closing as human ingenuity found ways to match alien science. Rick Santos led a daring raid on a Valdari prison camp that held captured human leaders. His team used quantum disruptors to disable alien security systems and freed hundreds of prisoners, including several former fleet officers. The rescued personnel brought valuable intelligence about Valdari operations and weaknesses. Tony Miller's success with shield jamming inspired other resistance cells to develop similar tactics. Human fighters learned to modify common electronic devices into weapons that could disrupt alien equipment. The Valdari found their supposedly superior technology failing at critical moments as humans discovered new ways to interfere with quantum systems. Admiral Carter operated from a mobile command center that moved constantly to avoid Valdari detection. She coordinated resistance activities across all human worlds while planning larger operations that would strike at the heart of alien power. Carter believed that humans could actually win this war if they remained united and continued to learn from each battle. Commander Taylor received reports that other human colonies were successfully using Mars tactics against Valdari ground forces. The combination of underground bases, hit-and-run attacks, and quantum disruption was proving effective on multiple worlds. Human defenders were no longer just surviving, but actually driving alien forces back in some areas. The war had become something the Valdari had never experienced before. Previous conquests had involved defeating organized military forces, then accepting the surrender of remaining population. Humans had no central authority that could surrender and no leadership structure that could be eliminated to end resistance. Zethkar grew increasingly frustrated as his commanders reported continued human defiance. The Supreme Commander had assured his superiors that this conquest would follow standard procedures, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Valdari forces were taking heavy casualties while making little progress toward actual control of human territory. Jake Morrison coordinated with resistance cells to plan attacks on Valdari command ships. His fleet had grown as more human vessels joined the underground navy that operated from hidden bases. Morrison believed that striking at alien leadership might disrupt their coordination and give human forces a decisive advantage. The quantum communication network allowed resistance leaders to share increasingly sophisticated plans for combined operations. What had begun as isolated acts of defiance was becoming a coordinated military campaign that challenged Valdari control throughout human space. The aliens found themselves fighting not just individual resistance cells, but an entire civilization that refused to accept defeat. President Brooks continued to broadcast messages of defiance from his hidden bunker, encouraging humans to maintain their resistance. His speeches were transmitted through the quantum network and repeated by resistance fighters across the galaxy. Brooks reminded humanity that they were fighting not just for survival, but for the right to remain free. The war entered its second year with humanity stronger than ever despite continued Valdari occupation. What had begun as desperate resistance had evolved into effective military operations that challenged alien control throughout human space. The resistance networks had grown into a shadow government that operated parallel to Valdari administration while constantly undermining alien authority. Commander Kelly Johnson planned the most ambitious human operation yet attempted. Intelligence. Reports indicated that a Valdari command ship would be visiting the outer colonies with minimal escort. Johnson assembled a strike force of modified civilian vessels equipped with Dr. Patel's latest quantum weapons. The goal was not just to attack the ship, but to capture it intact and steal vital intelligence about Valdari operations. The assault on the command ship succeeded beyond all expectations. Johnson's team used coordinated quantum disruption to disable alien shields while boarding parties fought their way through the vessel. The captured data revealed the true structure of the Valdari Empire and showed humanity exactly what they were fighting against. Captain Ben Clark analyzed the stolen intelligence and made discoveries that changed everything. The Valdari Empire controlled 847 worlds, but their military was spread desperately thin across such vast distances. Most importantly, the data revealed that many Valdari soldiers were themselves enslaved beings from conquered species forced to fight for their masters. Dr. Angela Torres had been working with captured Valdari prisoners and confirmed what the intelligence suggested. Many alien soldiers showed signs of neural implants that controlled their behavior. When she carefully removed these devices, some prisoners began to remember their original identities and expressed horror at what they had been forced to do. The revelation that the Valdari army included enslaved troops from conquered worlds spread quickly through the resistance networks. Human fighters began using Dr. Torres's techniques to disable neural implants during combat operations. Some alien soldiers who regained their free will immediately turned against their former masters and joined the human resistance. Jake Morrison developed new tactics based on the intelligence about Valdari force distribution. He realized that the alien empire maintained control through perceived invincibility rather than actual strength. If multiple worlds rebelled simultaneously, the Valdari would lack the resources to suppress all of them effectively. Admiral Carter coordinated with resistance leaders to plan simultaneous uprisings across all human colonies. The goal was to stretch Valdari forces beyond their breaking point while demonstrating to other conquered species that the Empire could be defeated. Carter believed that success would inspire rebellion throughout the galaxy. Captain Ben Clark pioneered the use of modified civilian ships as drone swarms that could overwhelm Valdari point defenses. His Hornets were individual vessels that lacked the firepower to challenge alien warships, but could attack in coordinated swarms that confused enemy targeting systems. The Battle of Luna became the testing ground for these new tactics. The Battle of Luna marked the first major human victory against Valdari forces. Clark's drone swarms attacked from multiple directions, while quantum disruptors jammed alien communications. The coordinated assault drove Valdari ships away from Earth's moon and proved that humans could win conventional battles against their supposed masters. Dr. Patel's workshops began mass-producing quantum weapons and disruption devices for distribution throughout the resistance networks. Her latest innovations included portable shield generators that could protect human fighters from Valdari energy weapons. The technological gap between humans and aliens continued to narrow as human science caught up with alien engineering. Commander Alex Taylor led the liberation of Mars colony as human forces finally drove the last Valdari troops from the Red Planet. The successful campaign demonstrated that alien occupation could be completely reversed through persistent resistance and superior tactics. Mars became the first human world to regain its independence and served as a model for other liberation efforts. Lieutenant Commander Rick Santos coordinated attacks on Valdari supply lines that left many alien bases cut off from reinforcement and resupply. His teams had learned to predict alien logistical patterns and could interrupt shipments of critical equipment. Santos proved that even a technologically superior enemy could be defeated through disruption of their support systems. Sergeant Tony Miller's squad perfected techniques for using quantum disruptors in close combat that allowed human infantry to fight Valdari troops on equal terms. Miller's methods were distributed throughout the resistance, and human fighters began winning ground battles that had previously been hopeless. The psychological impact on Valdari morale was significant as their troops faced effective opposition. For the first time, Zethkar faced increasing pressure from his superiors as the human conquest continued to deteriorate. The Supreme Commander had promised a quick victory, but instead found himself fighting a prolonged war against an enemy that grew stronger with each passing month. Other Valdari commanders began questioning his leadership and suggesting alternative Approaches. The resistance networks established contact with potential rebels among other conquered species. Dr. Torres's techniques for removing neural implants were shared with underground movements throughout the galaxy. Human agents began appearing on alien worlds to teach resistance tactics and provide quantum disruption technology. President Brooks emerged from hiding to address a gathering of liberated human colonies. His speech was broadcast throughout the Mao galaxy and included messages of hope for other enslaved species. Brooks explained that freedom was not a gift that could be granted or taken away, but a right that belonged to every thinking being in the universe. Colonel Amy Walsh led human forces in the liberation of Earth's major cities as Valdari occupation forces found themselves increasingly isolated and under attack. The aliens still controlled orbital space, but their ground positions were being systematically eliminated by resistance fighters who had learned to use alien weapons against their former owners. Jake Morrison commanded the growing human fleet that now included captured Valdari vessels operated by liberated crews. His forces began raiding alien bases throughout human space while avoiding major fleet engagements. Morrison realized that humans did not need to defeat the entire Valdari navy, but only needed to make occupation too costly to maintain. Dr. Angela. Torres made contact with resistance movements among other conquered species and began sharing human liberation techniques. Her methods for removing neural control implants were particularly valuable to beings who had been enslaved for generations. Torres became a symbol of hope for oppressed peoples throughout the Valdari Empire. The human rebellion was inspiring. Similar movements on dozens of worlds as news of their victories spread through the galaxy. The Valdari found themselves facing multiple simultaneous uprisings that stretched their military beyond the breaking point. For the first time in their history, the Empire was losing territory faster than it could reconquer it. Commander Kelly. Johnson planned increasingly ambitious operations as human capabilities continued to grow. Her latest mission involved striking at Valdari communication hubs to disrupt coordination between alien forces. Johnson believed that isolating enemy units would make them vulnerable to defeat in detail by concentrated human attacks. The second year of war ended with humanity not just surviving, but actually winning their fight for freedom. What had begun as hopeless resistance against impossible odds had become a successful revolution that threatened the entire Valdari Empire. Human fighters looked forward to the coming year with confidence that total victory was achievable. Colonel Nathan Price assembled the most diverse military force in galactic history as he prepared to strike at the heart of the Valdari Empire. His team included human resistance fighters, liberated alien soldiers, and reformed Valdari defectors who had abandoned their former masters. The target was the Andromeda communication relay that coordinated Valdari operations across half the galaxy. Dr. Maya Patel had spent months developing what she called freedom codes. These quantum viruses could travel through Valdari communication networks and disrupt the neural control implants that kept conquered species enslaved. When transmitted through the Empire's own infrastructure, the codes would reach every controlled world simultaneously and potentially liberate millions of beings. The mission to Andromeda required perfect coordination between multiple resistance cells and alien allies. Colonel Price would lead the assault force while Dr. Patel transmitted her freedom codes through the captured relay station. The operation had to succeed quickly before Valdari reinforcements could arrive to stop the broadcast. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the escort fleet that would protect Price's assault team during their approach to the relay station. His ships included vessels from a dozen different species, all united in their desire to break free from Valdari control. Morrison had learned to coordinate the diverse capabilities of alien technology with human tactical innovation. The journey to Andromeda took 3 weeks through space controlled by increasingly desperate Valdari forces. Enemy patrols searched frantically for the human fleet, but Morrison used deception tactics that confused their sensors. The diverse alien ships in his force did not match any known resistance patterns and passed through security checkpoints without triggering alarms. Dr. Angela Torres accompanied the mission to assist any liberated beings who might need medical attention after their neural implants were removed. She had become an expert at reversing Valdari mind control techniques and could help recently freed individuals adjust to their restored independence. Torres carried equipment that could treat dozens of different alien physiologies. Commander Rick Santos led the advanced reconnaissance team that scouted the relay station defenses. His soldiers included former Valdari troops who knew the station layout and security procedures. Santos discovered that most of the facility's defenders were themselves enslaved beings who might join the liberation effort once their implants were disabled. The assault on the Andromeda relay began with quantum disruption attacks that disabled the station's defensive systems. Colonel Price's forces then boarded the facility while Dr. Patel's team rushed to access the main communication array. The defenders fought briefly before Dr. Torres began removing their neural implants and converting them to allies. Dr. Patel connected her equipment to the Valdari communication network and began transmitting freedom codes throughout the galaxy. The quantum viruses spread through every relay station and reached every controlled world within hours. On planets that had been enslaved for centuries, beings suddenly remembered who they were and began to fight back against their oppressors. The Theklar were crystalline beings who had served the Valdari for 400 years after their homeworld was conquered. When the freedom codes reached their neural implants, the crystal people shattered their control devices and began to sing. Their harmonic voices disrupted Valdari equipment while their razor-sharp bodies cut through alien armor like paper. Captain Ben Clark monitored communications as reports of rebellion reached the relay station from across the galaxy. The Molari aquatic species had flooded their occupied cities and drowned the Valdari garrison troops. The Zenthi insect warriors had overwhelmed their guards through sheer numbers and were consuming alien equipment to build new weapons. The rebellion spread faster than even Dr. Patel had hoped, as liberated species used their unique abilities against former masters. Plant-based Verdani released toxic spores that killed Valdari troops, while energy beings called photons overloaded alien power systems. Each species fought using methods their conquerors had never encountered. Admiral Lisa Carter received reports from throughout human space as alien reinforcement fleets abandoned their positions to deal with uprisings on their own worlds. The Valdari Empire was collapsing from within as conquered species remembered their independence and struck back against centuries of oppression. Human colonies found themselves suddenly free as alien occupation forces retreated. Commander Alex Taylor led human forces in pursuit of fleeing Valdari ships as the Empire's control over human space completely collapsed. Many alien vessels surrendered immediately, while others tried to fight their way through liberation fleets that now included ships from dozens of species. The hunters had become the hunted as former victims turned against their oppressors. Zethkar watched his empire disintegrate from his flagship while frantically trying to coordinate a response to simultaneous rebellions on hundreds of worlds. The Supreme Commander had never faced anything like this situation, and his tactical training provided no guidance for dealing with empire-wide insurrection. His subordinates began defecting to join the liberation forces. Jake Morrison found himself commanding an ever-growing fleet as liberated alien vessels joined the human forces. Ships from across the galaxy arrived at the Andromeda relay to coordinate their attacks on remaining Valdari positions. What had begun as a human resistance movement had become a galactic alliance dedicated to ending the Empire forever. President Daniel Brooks addressed the newly formed Galactic Liberation Alliance from the captured relay station. His speech was broadcast to every free world as he explained humanity's vision for a galaxy where no being would ever again be forced to kneel before another. Brooks invited all liberated species to join in building a new order based on cooperation rather than conquest. Dr. Patel worked with alien scientists to develop improved freedom codes that could reach even the most heavily controlled worlds. Her techniques were shared freely with all liberation forces as she helped establish communication networks that could not be jammed by Valdari technology. Patel became known throughout the galaxy as the architect of freedom. The Liberation Alliance grew daily as more species broke free from Valdari control and joined the fight against their former masters. Ancient enemies united against the common threat of slavery, while former rivals worked together to build a better future. The galaxy had never seen such cooperation between diverse civilizations. Captain Rachel Adams arrived at Earth, leading a fleet of liberated vessels, just as Zethkar launched his final desperate assault on humanity's homeworld. The Supreme Commander had gathered his remaining loyal forces for one last attempt to crush the rebellion by destroying its birthplace. Instead, he found the skies above Earth filled with ships from 100 worlds. The final battle for Earth began as Valdari forces encountered the largest liberation fleet in galactic history. Human ships fought alongside crystal warriors, aquatic defenders, and energy beings in a display of unity that would have been impossible under the old empire. The battle became a symbol of what free beings could accomplish when they worked together. Colonel Nathan Price coordinated ground defenses as liberation forces landed to support human resistance fighters. The planet's surface became a battlefield, where beings from across the galaxy fought side by side against the last remnants of Valdari power. Price realized that this fight would determine whether freedom or slavery ruled the future. Dr. Angela Torres established field hospitals to treat wounded fighters from dozens of different species. Her medical team included alien doctors who had been freed from neural control and wanted to help heal the wounds caused by centuries of oppression. Torres saw the battle as humanity's chance to prove that liberation meant cooperation, not conquest. The alliance of free worlds had turned the tables completely on their former oppressors. Where once the Valdari had seemed invincible, they now faced enemies on every front who fought not for conquest, but for the right to remain free. The empire that had ruled through fear found itself overwhelmed by the power of hope. The final battle for Earth raged across land, sea, and space as the largest liberation fleet in galactic history faced the desperate remnants of Valdari power. Ships from 100 worlds filled the skies above humanity's homeworld, while ground forces from dozens of species fought alongside human resistance fighters. The planet had become the symbol of freedom for every being that had ever suffered under alien oppression. Admiral Lisa Carter coordinated the diverse fleet that surrounded Earth as Valdari forces made their last stand. Crystal ships that sang. As they flew, fought beside aquatic vessels filled with water-breathing warriors, while energy beings danced between the stars as living weapons. Carter had never imagined commanding such a force, but she understood that this battle would determine the future of the galaxy. Zethkar retreated to his flagship as his empire crumbled around him. The Supreme Commander watched centuries of Valdari dominance collapse in a matter of hours as species after species joined the Liberation Alliance. His tactical computers could not process the chaos of fighting beings who refused to follow any predictable patterns of behavior. Colonel Nathan Price led the ground assault on Valdari command centers as liberation forces stormed alien positions throughout Earth's major cities. His troops included former enemies who now fought side by side against their common oppressor. Price saw humans and aliens working together in ways that the old empire had never allowed, and realized this cooperation was humanity's greatest weapon. Dr. Maya Patel continued broadcasting freedom codes from her mobile laboratory as the battle raged around her. Every transmission liberated more enslaved beings and added new fighters to the Alliance forces. Patel knew that her quantum viruses were not just disrupting neural implants, but spreading the idea of freedom itself throughout the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison commanded a strike force that hunted down fleeing Valdari ships as they tried to escape the battle. His mixed fleet of human and alien vessels worked together with perfect coordination, despite their different technologies and fighting styles. Morrison understood that the Liberation Alliance represented something entirely new in galactic history. Commander. Alex Taylor fought his way through the ruins of Denver as human and alien forces worked together to eliminate the last Valdari strongholds. Taylor watched crystal beings slice through alien armor while plant warriors released toxic spores and realized that diversity was strength rather than weakness. The old empire had tried to make everyone the same, but the Alliance celebrated differences. Dr. Angela Torres treated wounded fighters from across the galaxy in field hospitals that had become symbols of interspecies cooperation. Her medical teams included doctors from dozens of worlds who shared their knowledge freely to save lives regardless of species. Torres saw this collaboration as proof that beings could work together when they chose cooperation over conquest. Lieutenant Commander Rick Santos infiltrated Zethkar's flagship with a team of former Valdari soldiers who had turned against their masters. The mission was to capture the Supreme Commander and end the Empire's resistance without destroying the vessel. Santos knew that Zethkar's surrender would convince remaining Valdari forces to lay down their weapons. The bridge of Zethkar's flagship became the final battleground as liberation forces fought their way through the vessel's defenses. The Supreme. Commander watched his elite guards fall to enemies that included beings from species he had personally conquered. For the first time in his life, Zethkar began to understand what his empire had done to the galaxy. President Daniel Brooks arrived on the captured flagship to face Zethkar in person. The human leader offered the Supreme Commander the same choice the Valdari had given humanity 3 years earlier. Zethkar could surrender and learn what freedom meant, or continue fighting and face the consequences of his actions. Zethkar stared at President Brooks and finally understood what made humans dangerous. They did not fight for resources or territory, but for an idea that was more powerful than any weapon. The concept of inherent dignity and self-determination had spread from humanity to every corner of the galaxy and could not be defeated by force. The Supreme. Commander's surrender was broadcast throughout the remaining Valdari fleet as their leader laid down his weapons and accepted defeat. Many alien soldiers followed his example and chose to learn about freedom rather than die for an empire that had enslaved them. Others fled to distant systems where they would spend the rest of their lives as refugees. Captain Ben Clark monitored communications as news of victory spread throughout the galaxy. Liberated worlds celebrated their freedom while former Valdari territories began the difficult process of learning to govern themselves. The galaxy was finally free, but Clark knew that building lasting peace would be harder than winning the war. Admiral Carter accepted the formal surrender of Valdari forces, in a ceremony that included representatives from every liberated species. The diverse gathering proved that beings from across the galaxy could work together when they shared common values. Carter understood that the real victory was not military, but moral. Dr. Patel began working with alien scientists to establish new communication networks that would connect free worlds without the possibility of central control. Her quantum technology would ensure that no single species could ever again dominate galactic communications. Patel wanted to make certain that freedom, once won, could never be lost again. Jake Morrison found himself promoted to admiral as the Liberation Alliance began organizing a new galactic government. His experience commanding diverse fleets made him valuable in building military forces that represented all species equally. Morrison believed that the Alliance Navy should protect freedom rather than project power. The formation of the Galactic Free Alliance was announced from Earth as representatives from 200 worlds gathered to write a new constitution. The document established principles that had never before been tried on such a scale. Every species would be equal regardless of their technology or military power, and no being would ever be forced to serve another. President Brooks addressed the Constitutional Convention as delegates from across the galaxy worked to create lasting peace. His speech emphasized that freedom was not a destination, but a journey that required constant effort from every generation. Brooks reminded the assembled beings that they had proven tyranny could be defeated, but vigilance would be needed to prevent its return. Commander Taylor was chosen to lead the new Alliance security forces that would protect free worlds from any attempt to recreate the old empire. His experience fighting guerrilla campaigns taught him that the best defense was an informed population that would resist oppression from the beginning. Taylor planned to share human resistance techniques with every world in the Alliance. Dr. Torres established medical schools that would train doctors from every species to work together in treating patients regardless of their biological differences. Her institutions became models for the kind of cooperation that the Alliance hoped to achieve in every field. Torres proved that beings could learn from each other when they approached differences with curiosity rather than fear. The new galactic capital was established on Earth not because humans had conquered the galaxy, but because they had inspired it to free itself. The planet that had refused to kneel before alien overlords became the symbol of what was possible when beings chose hope over despair. Earth represented the idea that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Colonel Price was appointed to lead the Alliance intelligence service that would monitor for signs of new threats to galactic freedom. His diverse teams included former enemies who now worked together to protect the peace they had fought to achieve. Price understood that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance against those who would take it away. Admiral Morrison stood before the Alliance Assembly as representatives from across the galaxy gathered to celebrate the 5th anniversary of liberation. His closing words echoed through space and were heard on every free world in the galaxy. Today we proved that the desire for freedom burns in every sentient heart, and no matter how dark the night, someone will always stand up and say no to tyranny. The stars themselves seemed brighter as beings throughout the galaxy looked up at skies that were no longer watched over by overlords, but shared among equals who had refused to kneel. The galaxy had learned that freedom was not something that could be granted by the powerful, but something that belonged to every thinking being in the universe.